I wonder, do you have a favourite gospel? Some favour Mark. His gospel is generally held to be the earliest, the one written within a few years of Jesus' life and death. Certainly Mark is attentive to the details of Jesus' life. When the storm on Lake Galilee came, it was Mark that remembered Jesus was asleep with his head on the rower's pillow. Or perhaps you prefer Luke, the eminent doctor. It seems that Luke had a commission from his friend Theophilus to write an account of Jesus' life. Writing for the same customer, Luke went on to record the events of the early church in what we know as the Acts of the Apostles. John is a very different gospel. John was certainly a deep thinker, and his gospel approaches the stories of Jesus' life from a distinctive perspective. We don't know much about John. He refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved, which at first hearing sounds a bit arrogant. But in reality, it's probably the exact opposite. John was almost certainly one of those closest to Jesus, and he didn't want to draw attention to himself. He was in the inner circle who were allowed to see the transfiguration. They also saw Jairus' daughter brought back from death to life. And then as Jesus hung on the cross, it was John to whom Jesus entrusted his mother for care. It was not given to many to know Jesus as closely as John. And then there's Matthew, the first of the Gospels and the longest too. Matthew was a church leader, and the vast majority of his congregation were converts from Judaism. It was important to Matthew to show his people the indispensable link between Jesus and the Jewish faith. So he shows them how Jesus came to fulfill the Old Testament, but at the same time to judge the Jews for their unfaithfulness to their religion. None of the other Gospels denounces so forcibly the hypocritical outlook of the Pharisees. The Jews are called to see Jesus as the promised Messiah, the Son of David, and judgment is pronounced upon them for their failure to respond to him. So in the Gospels we have 4 portraits of Jesus, written by very different people and each with a different audience in mind. We're blessed to have all 4, because together they give us a rounded picture of the Lord Jesus. So behind these 4 accounts stands the enigmatic figure of Jesus himself, the same in all 4 Gospels. Early in the new year, we're going to be starting a new sermon series looking closely at the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew concentrates on demonstrating that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah. Many Jews were expecting a political leader who would free them from Roman domination. We might make a comparison with an overbearing government charging far too much in tax and filled with corruption and hypocrisy. There are a few countries in the world where civil unrest has bubbled to the surface, and the people have looked for a leader who would usher in better times. Well, it was exactly like that for the first century Jews. The trouble is that Jesus came with a very different agenda. He came announcing what Matthew calls the kingdom of heaven. He does this because for Jews the name of God was too holy to be uttered. But it's a helpful name because God's kingdom is essentially the way things are in heaven. God's kingdom is characterized by all those wonderful aspects of God's character: his faithfulness, his mercy, his compassion, gentleness and love, his justice. These are the qualities of the kingdom of heaven, and Jesus had come to bring that kingdom to earth. One of the most famous passages of the Gospel is the so-called Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus sets out just what God's kingdom looks like. And it's wonderful. This is the sort of life King Jesus wants us to experience. Of course, we only see it in part now. One day it will come in all its fullness when Jesus returns, or when we go to be with him, whichever comes first. I've entitled our new series, Following Jesus, Encountering the King. And it's my prayer that as we continue to follow Jesus, we will have a vibrant, life-changing encounter with the only King really worthy of our life's devotion. In preparation for the new series, you might like to commit to reading the Gospel through from beginning to end. It will certainly help you to have the big picture before we start looking in detail a few verses at a time. All this fits perfectly with our motto text for 2020. Our 2020 vision is those few verses from John 12 verse 21. Some Greeks had arrived in Jerusalem and they came across Philip and asked him directly, "Sir, we would see Jesus," they said. Well, it's my prayer for all of us in this important year for our church that we will see Jesus.